book, Sex and Violence, was a finalist for the William C. Morris YA Debut Author Award. It was nominated for YALSA's 2014 Best Fiction for Young Adult, and it was a finalist in the Best Young Adult Fiction category of the Sybil's Awards. Naturally, because Sybil's judges know what's what. That book was praised for its character-driven realism. Her subsequent novels, Perfectly Good White Boy and Cut Both Ways, are similarly full of sarcastic characters and wrenching emotions, frequently managing to be very funny and absolutely horrible at the same time. You get the feeling, reading her books, that Carrie Mesrobian has a bone-deep memory of the crushing humiliations and soaring ecstasies of being a teen. And if you doubt me, you need to just check out her Tumblr. Conversationswithmyfakeboyfriend.tumblr.com is all crushing humiliations and soaring ecstasies with some JPEGs of hellacious. Wait, I got sidetracked. So I was writing this intro last night, and night before last, and I started laughing at the way Tom Hardy gives her pep talks on Tumblr. Then I had to watch Peaky Blinders again, and I'm so sorry. But this actually a good segue. Carrie's new book, Cut Both Ways, continues with the grinding teen realism, but also has a lot of actual grinding. Our young hero, Bill, has a lot going on. He's got divorced parents, he's got little stepsisters, he's living in a house that's half a wreck, there's substance abuse, but he's also got a girlfriend for the first time, and he keeps finding himself making out with his friend Angus, who is supposed to be. Best of all, Carrie Mesrobian gives us all this good stuff in prose that knows when to stay streamlined and when to explode. The way Carrie writes makes you happy to be a YA book reviewer.
All right, so there's going to be a preface to the actual prepared remarks. Thank you, Paula, for that very nice introduction. And the fake boyfriends also. Thank you. Oh, God. I want to preface this just so you guys have an idea of where I'm coming from a little bit. When someone asks me to do a talk or teach a class, I get really nervous because I have a really hard time with certainty as a concept, and generally when you go in front of people to talk or teach a class, you should be certain of a couple of things so that you don't appear completely incompetent. But the concept of certainty troubles me, especially when I feel like I know a little bit about something, but then I am conflicted in the middle. And I want to explain a little bit about that. There's weird dialectic I have with my work as a teacher and my work writing books. So I write books about teenagers, and I also teach teenagers. Not all YA authors have to teach teenagers, or for that matter, even like being around teenagers. I feel bad for the ones who don't like them, teenagers, of course, but those are two parts of my role. Teaching and writing are both extremely creative endeavors, and I love both of them. They're full of problems I enjoy solving. But that is about when it comes to what they have in common. Teaching is not about me. It's about the kids and their needs, and me trying to transmit data to them in a way that they can accept and absorb and analyze. And what I want for the kids that come in front of me as a teacher is everything good. I want them to have everything I can give to them. I want to listen to them. I want to support them. I want their lives to be great. It hurts me when they struggle. It hurts me when I can't help them. And unfortunately, if you teach teenagers, you know that really it is impossible to save them from growing up. They are going to be miserable. They are going to be uncomfortable. They're going to suffer. And even people who have great intentions and who love them very well can do nothing about it. And I think maybe that's why teenagers make people nervous. So a lot of teaching can be me wanting the best for these kids that are thrown in front of me, and wanting to help them in so many ways, and knowing I can't, but still desiring that. I used to teach high school Spanish. In fact, I'm still licensed to teach in the state of Minnesota, but I will never, ever teach high school Spanish again. When I taught high school Spanish, it was because I taught Spanish 1 and 2, which most kids at that school needed to graduate. And so all of my students were they were there not because they loved la lengua, they were there because they had to be there. Now I teach writing to teenagers at the Literary Center. This is a place where they ask to come and learn, where they love reading, where people have built them into amazing readers. So much work has gone into these kids by the time I get to teach them. It's unreal. This is work that probably a lot of you have done as librarians and teachers and parents. And so it's a totally different job in that respect, and I'm really privileged to teach them. But again, just like the population I taught before, it's a very specific population, and trying to write books for them wouldn't make sense because teenagers are not a monolith. So that's the teaching side. The writing side, I will tell you this, even though it feels sort of Jonathan Franzen-y, is totally selfish. I don't really care what teenagers want when I sit and write a book. I don't care what is interesting to them. I don't think I could ever know what is interesting to them. It'd be like asking, what are adults interested in? What a stupid question, right? And so for me, for my real human students that I sit in a classroom with and who show me their writing and tell me their boyfriend troubles or their girlfriend troubles, I want the best. But for the fake characters in the books, may you live in interesting times. Anything bad happens to you. I don't care if you suffer. I don't care if it's hard. I don't care if no one is there for you. I don't care if you don't get the resources and support you need. In fact, I hope you don't get any of them. Depending on what the circumstances are, I'm interested in what I'm interested in. It's extremely selfish. It's very different from teaching in that it's completely selfish, in fact. So I just wanted you guys to know that. I don't have a agenda, but at the same time, like, there's certain things I wouldn't put in a book. And you could maybe take me out for a beer or a coffee later tonight, and we could maybe talk about some of those things I would never put in a book, just because they displease me politically, perhaps. But teaching and writing, being around kids, working with real kids, and working with fake kids, they're just not even the same thing. And if you know people who write books and are teachers, you need to love them extra hard, because I don't know how they do that. That's a lot of expensive energy and emotional support. Okay, now we're going to write the real speech. Okay. So the title of this speech is called Welcome to the Edge, Young Adult Readers and Young Adult Fiction. Everybody ready? I was going to take my cardigan off, but it's just a little, so we can all take them off together. Also, I'm going to refer to several books and whatnot in here, and I have handouts with those on them, so don't worry about having to scribble everything down if you want to. Okay, so, books. When we discuss books, we're basically discussing the nature of reality. How we experience life, how we think the world is, how we understand our place in it. This is a lot to put on one little story, but this is the nature of reality is basically what we're talking about. To even imply, though, that a story is little is a kind of falsehood. We continually teach ourselves about reality through stories. And whether these stories have multisyllabic words, or they have illustrations, or come in verse or prose is beside the point. All of our lessons come in story form. Even scientific inquiry is a kind of story. This happened, then we thought that would happen, but then something else happened. So as most readers know, as you all know, the problem with reality is that it's ubiquitous. There's no getting away from reality, even when you try your best to do so. Even when you want to just open a book and get in bed with a package of Girl Scout cookies and a hot cocoa, which is not that I do that regularly. Girl Scout cookies only come once a year, so one can't do that all the time. But anyway, so we have this ubiquitous reality that's surrounding us. We can't get away from that, even if we want to escape into a story, because we're still weighing the story's concerns against the concerns of our own reality and the experiences of the characters on the page. But the juicy part of this, for me, is that with respect to books, everyone's ubiquitous reality is different. What's considered normal, standard, regular, baseline, average, is quite subjective. I will tell you a little story. I grew up in a house where it was very normal to make toast and spread on the toast a product called Cheese Whiz. Have you heard of Cheese Whiz? So Cheese Whiz, if you haven't heard of it, is this fluorescent orange cheese product. It's probably like 0.0001% cheese, and it's kind of the consistency of lip gloss. Anyway, it was always, my mother always had that in the fridge, and we would eat that for breakfast. And when my friends started coming over to the house and getting so comfortable that they would open our refrigerator and start like rummaging around in it, and they would see the Cheese Whiz, they were like, gross. And then I'd be like, no, you should have it on toast. And then they were even more. And so anyway, that was normal for me. That was our reality. I had another friend, though, whose house, her refrigerator contained other weird things. Nail polish, batteries, cartons of her mother's cigarettes. For me, why would you put batteries in the refrigerator? Why would you put nail polish and cigarettes, for God's sake? Like, looking in their refrigerator was like going into another land, right? It was a totally different thing. So even though your reality is everywhere, your versions of it don't glide well together. And so what I want to talk about a little bit with respect to that is, what do people mean when they call a book edgy? My reason for meditating on this is, again, pure Jonathan Franzen selfishness. I have a very well-developed selfish side. Lots of people call my books edgy. They also use words like unflinching, unrelenting, brutal, gut-wrenching, which doesn't sound like any fun, really, to me. But the word edgy keeps popping up. And what does that mean when we're talking about a book about young people? What does it mean when we're recommending a book to a young person? And those are the concerns I want to circle around. So, in my experience, usually when a young adult book is described as edgy, it means that there's sex in it. Like sex that goes all the way to the end of the sex having, not just dissolve into each other's arms. Chapter 10. Like, it shows the whole thing, right? Another thing that will make a book edgy is sex and drugs. Still more edgy is sex and drugs and rape. And this sex stuff and drug stuff and rape and sexual abuse and assault stuff, this is all happening to straight, middle-class white kids. That is edgy. Because apparently middle-class straight white kids live in some kingdom where everything's placid and content, and no one has genitalia, and everything is fine. So it's very remarkable that we would talk about those things happening to them, because basically their lives are perfect. Please note, though, I think when sex, drugs, and rape or sexual assault happen to kids of color, they might call the book perverted, if they call it anything at all. There's a really, really interesting series written by Melinda Lowe on diversityandya.com, which I've got in my reference list, called Perceptions of Diversity and Book Review. Reviews. And if you haven't read that, I think it's a really important read because it gets to many assumptions we see in book reviews, or even in descriptions or critical praise, that the notion of calling something edgy is a very privileged notion. And it also makes a lot of assumptions that sort of take really blatant shortcuts to the truth and don't leave us with any clarity about the actual content. So reality is like that. It's kind of a giant pain in the ass, and it means something different to all of us. Interestingly, books that feature lots of violence are not usually called edgy. Those are usually labeled epic, or fast-paced, or boys will love this. Girls do not like violence, okay? They don't understand it, or need it, or commit it, but boys do. So, just FYI. For some reason in the United States, we really don't worry about violence. We like to worry a lot about sexual activity and drug use. Maybe because both of those things can feel good, and I don't know. Violence doesn't get a book labeled edgy, though there are some people who tend to get nervous about violent content. But those people are usually nervous about sexual content and drug use too. The people that are really vocal about violence in books, they're kind of like the people that give away toothbrushes on Halloween instead of candy. Like you can't really argue with that, can you? You're gonna sound like a dick if you're like, why are you not giving them candy? You know. But are there people that like make cookies that are sweetened with apple juice? And you're like, can't argue with that. You're right, sugar's bad, you know, but the cookies aren't good, you know. And there's something they're missing also about the role of violence in our media, which is a whole other topic. Anyway, so everything that's outside the kingdom of white middle class film tends to make people nervous. And even if it's in print form and the story itself is being illustrated by the reader's imagination, it's something we need to worry about. We need to regulate the imagination. That readers must conspire to create the sex or the violence or the drug use or whatever edgy thing is in the book doesn't seem to matter to certain people. This is either considered absolutely terrifying or completely of no value. So I see this edgy conversation has two main teams. I'm going to call them, just for the sake of ease, Team Terrified and Team Zero Value. Team Terrified are those who tend to be sure that the act of imagining something violent or sexual means that the author, or librarian, or teacher, or bookseller might as well have handed this reader a boarding pass to depravity. Team Terrified often acts as if the risks mentioned in the story will rise up via the prose and seal the reader's doom. This camp flatters me as an author. It views my influence as a writer of stories as far greater than I do. Too bad my personal bank account does not flatter me in the same way, but it gives me quite a bit of power that I have such influence that what I write on the page will embolden people to act. The other team, besides Team Terrified, is Team Zero Value. They believe reading this kind of content is detrimental. They think there's nothing going on but mindless prurience when a reader enters a text imaginatively. They see the brain as a kind of green screen for debauchery and not a place where ethics and self-awareness and philosophy are churning alongside the story. Team Zero Value sees no reason why a young person would want to interface with risk via printed text. This kind of reading for them is a gateway to worse things, a precursor to failure, and it's no better than committing these acts, pillaging and repining the person. This camp, the Zero Value camp, is also pretty sure we can change reality by making sure our fiction is conflict diverse and features this thing called a strong female character. If you're wondering what a strong female character is, by the way, I can tell you that as well. Because the word strong doesn't mean the author has made a detailed and layered depiction of a girl character. It's kind of literal. It's like Title IX, except literary. And so what strong female characters are in YA are this. Doesn't have sex. She's physically strong, like muscles. There. She stands up for her loved ones in a way that usually means self-sacrifice. And she doesn't ever wear high heels or makeup unless she's forced into it by the superficial dingbats who run the Capitol. This character often finds that the solution to all of her problems is if she were just dead. If she would die and erase herself on behalf of the cause or for the good of her loved ones. So show me a person in your real life that you think meets the strong female character definition, and I will show you a person that you don't know very well. And also female, like, do we ever say strong male character? I've never heard. We always think calling them strong female characters. I don't know. Why can't we just say girls? I don't get it. But anyway, okay. So back to the edge. Where is the edge? It seems to move with every reader, this edge. It seems to be meaningless then. It's not a metric of anything to call something edgy, yet this word persists in reviews and descriptions of YA fiction. What does it mean to write edgy fiction? National Book Award-winning author Pete Houtman recently said this in a Twitter conversation about edginess. He contended that one must have a limit in order to have an edge. And so my question, Twitter is a confusing land full of all sorts of claims. So I'm reading this and I'm thinking, well, is the writer the one with the limit, or is it the reader, or is it the person tasked with buying the books for the school library? Like, who has the limit? So Houtman also helpfully wrote this blog post that I can steal from because I thought it was very good. He says, very few authors set out to write risky or aggravating novels. Most of us write in hopes of attracting a large, faithful, and enthusiastic audience. You don't accomplish that by writing things that make people feel bad. On the other hand, if one is writing so safely that there is not even a hint of discomfort, one risks being both bored and boring. So what we do is to write at the periphery of our comfort zone. We push the outer edges of the zone, helping to convince our readers to share our thrill at flirting with the unknown. Graham Greene once said, speaking of writers, our childhoods are our credit balances. I used to resent being brought up in a stable suburban middle-class environment. Why wasn't I raised by missionaries in the Congo, or by circus clowns, or Joan Crawford? How will I ever become a writer if I have no astonishing, exotic, terrifying experiences to write about? Because I viewed my life as mundane, I read books that let me experience things outside my personal history: war, sex, death, agony, ecstasy, horror. I wanted to know about life on the edge. I wanted to experience the whole human package from birth to death, and I wanted it now. Teenagers who are bored out of their skulls, and by which I mean most of them and most of the time, are compelled to do interesting things, including such old standbys as driving fast, using mind-altering substances, practicing the art of procreation, and performing remarkable stunts on skateboards. They also perform dangerous intellectual stunts, including hero worship, competitive apathy, extreme narcissism, and an abrupt reordering of the universe in the form of sudden religious conversion, which is what I dealt with in Godless, which is his National Award-winning book. In fact, most of my YA work is drawn directly from those 5 or 6 boring, embarrassing, mind-numbing, awkward adolescent years, and it's all still there in a midden in the back of my head. I mine that midden, my credit balance, on a daily basis. If you haven't read Pete Houtman's Godless, he won the National Book Award for that in 2004. You might want to consider it. Godless continues to be challenged in school and public libraries all over the United States. The book is about these kids that decide to create their own religion. They were going to worship the town water tower. And so, yeah, it's a great book, and definitely this kind of sacrilegious pursuit is clearly an edge for some people. It's funny also the people that are really good at letting their edges be known are really noisy and can write really good letters to newspapers and school boards. Or they don't have a lot of hobbies, I'm guessing. Most people don't have a lot of, like they don't have the good cable, maybe. Anyway, so this is an interesting question about the limit. I'm not talking as Kate Helen anymore, back to Amy. Is there a limit to our empathy? Is there a limit to our curiosity? Is there a limit to our desire to understand the world? I'm not trying to be rhetorical and suggest, no, there's no limit, fly free. I think there probably is a limit to all of those things. But, I mean, as a teacher, I don't want to endorse that. I don't know what my kids' limits might be, so I don't want to be, really overt about building a fence around empathy. There are definitely limits to my own empathy as a teacher, because I get worn out by people just like anyone else. And there are also limits to my own imagination. I can't write anything supernatural to save my life. I wish I had a limitless kind of ability and energy, but I don't. But I don't know, like, in terms of being a reader, I don't know that I have a limit. It would be interesting to map that out. Again, feel free to invite me for a drink. We can map them together. But I'm wondering, does this edge have a use for readers? Like saying, here's where I will go no further. Does it have a use for people who are building readers and encouraging readers? I don't know. What I want to do is give you a couple of profiles of readers I have known over the years, and we'll talk a little bit about what their edge might be. So I'll give you some data about each of these readers. Reader A is a 16-year-old white person who prefers not to identify themselves by gender. So now I will trip over pronouns and use they. Reader A lives in a city. Reader A reads paper books and electronic books. So what would this reader's edge be? Maybe a book like Brooklyn Burning by Steve Rezanoff, which has two main characters that fall in love and they are never identified by gender. Or would that be too close to this reader's concerns? Would it be familiar and thus boring? Maybe I would recommend to this reader Written on the Body by Jeanette Winterson, which is an adult. It's a literary fiction book. Or a nonfiction book like Gender Outlaws by Kate Bornstein, or even you can go back and drag Orlando by Virginia Woolf on Mothballs, or I could ask if they had read Every Day by David Levithan, the Cycler and Recycler series by Lauren McLaughlin might work. But again, maybe that reality for this reader A is not where they want to spend time. I have known this person for so long, it's very hard for me to switch the pronouns. Okay, so again, I can make guesses about what would be edgy for this reader. I don't know if I would be right. Reader B is 18 years old. She's a girl, she lives in the suburbs, she's African American. She reads and writes fantasy, tons of fantasy. So what am I going to recommend to her? Where would her edge be? Would her edge be a book by Chloe Booth called Tyrell, which is about a homeless family on the streets of Brooklyn? She's never been homeless, she's never been a boy. But maybe not, because maybe his experience as being a Tyrell is about an African American boy. Maybe that's something she is too close to and doesn't want to contend with. Maybe it's too familiar. Or maybe she needs something with an African American girl as the main character. Recently, we've seen a couple kind of a resurgence of more fantasy books featuring people of color, although they're kind of difficult to find mind, a lot of times people go, Octavia Butler, and then they just stop. But we could offer up, I think, let's see, there's, it's not the ember and the ashes, it's the, everything has the word ashes in it lately. It's
Wrath.
the wrath and the dawn. Would that be one? Or is it an ember in the ashes?
Ember in the ashes.
Okay. So those would be, I would also maybe prescribe some Elia Dawn Johnson, the Summer Prince. Would be a good one. Knots and Crosses by Mallory Blackman. The Shadow Speaker by Anita Okafor. And Ninth Ward by Jewel Parker Rhodes. So yeah, this is a reader that maybe we need to serve better as publishers and authors. Reader C is 16 years old, he's white, he's male, he lives in the suburbs, he reads primarily on electronic devices, and it's mostly sci-fi, no romance, and he's a gamer. This is a kid who is comfortable contributing to Reddit. You can just see him now. So what's that kid's edge? Do I give him like Just Listen by Sarah Dessen? Or Anna and the French Kiss by Stephanie Perkins? What do I give that kid to press and push him further? Reader D is 18 years old, white, male, lives in a small town. Reader D has only read 2 books since the age of 13, and one of them was a book his aunt wrote called Sex and Violence. I had him read it because he has terrible ADHD, and I wanted to see if he could stick with the plot. The other was Veronica Roth's Divergent. Those are the only books he's read since he was 13 years old. Is there an edge for someone who won't read? That's a good question. What do we do with that kid? For that kid, for this kind of reader, all books are a limit. They are work, they're not pleasure. What do we do about him? I don't know. That's another thing we could chat about this evening, I suppose. The last reader, Reader E, is 16 years old, female, Chinese American, self-identified lesbian, reads paper books and electronic books. And she's also homeschooled. This is a girl who loves fantasy and romance, but cannot get enough of female sexual experience. She loves, for example, Love in the Time of Global Warming by Francesca Wade-Block. But she's tired of the same dozen LGBTQIA books that get mentioned every time someone talks about queer teenagers. What she wants is a book where the book just has queer characters, but it's not about gay bashing or coming out of harassment or pain or any other difficulty. Just queer lives at the center of some other story. I think we might be getting there, maybe. But I don't think coming out narratives are like going away. I think everyone does that a little differently, and so I think we need a lot of those stories. Everyone's family is different. So I hate it when people talk about, well, queer books are the new trend. I'm just like, swear words. You know? That's terrible. They're not vampires. That's not okay. Anyway, okay. So those are some readers I've known and some of the things that they might find interesting or perplexing when it comes to the books we're serving out to them. I also know a lot of teenage readers who say things to me like, well, I only read Homer. I'm rereading Infinite Jest this summer, you know, and I'm just like, really, you know. So there are those kinds of teenagers who they have exceeded the YA grasp. They are not going to cop to being adolescents. They don't hold up anything that would mark them as such. All right, so what happens when we go to the edge as a reader? Is the edge a place where we learn about people who aren't like us, who don't look like us, or speak our language, or practice our religion, or share the same material privileges? Is the edge a place where horrible things that haven't happened to us happen instead to characters? Is the edge where we learn about our assumptions? How do you defend this edge when it means so many different things to different people? How do you keep books on the shelf for readers whose edge is different than, say, the edge edges of very vocal parents in school districts who have girls with reality and lots of spare time on their hands. I don't know how to answer that question. I do know some people advocate that there not be any sort of forum in any library for challenges, that there not even be a format, that it be unthinkable that people would ask for something to be removed, to not only block off the road, but to not even pave it. I don't even know if that's possible. I would love to hear what librarians think about that. But like, what do you do when you have a student who loves Twilight and 50 Shades of Grey, and you maybe can't stomach those books for some reasons, or many reasons? But do you impose that edge on the reader? Do you assume that she's headed down a dark road of improbable fantasy, where her own self-interest and safety are on the line? Do you recall your own flirtation with naughty popular novels and want to kind of curl up and die in shame and horror about that? Or do you have to do anything at all? Can we employ benign neglect when it comes to this kind of reader? Do we trust readers, and do we trust young people to helm their own reading lives in a way that suits them? Is there really anything at stake when a girl wants to read Twilight or 50 Shades of Grey? A while back, there was a whole movement on Twitter that was marked by the hashtag YASaves, and sometimes you still see mention of that. And it's kind of turd in the punch bowl of me to bring it up, but it's like, if YASaves, then is the reverse true? Does it kill? Does it screw you up? Does it damage? It's really hard to argue with people who claim that YA saved them. Maybe we need to argue about what being saved means. I did have a student who took a class I taught on the Twilight series a couple years ago. I taught this class a couple years in a row, and it was filled with a waiting list, and it was all girls. And they all just rolled into the room, ready to just blow up. They were on Team Jacob or Team Edward, thank you, or Team one of the other brothers in the weird extended family. And so they all had their like thing that they really liked, and they were really excited about it. And this student, she came to me loving Edward. She was Team Edward, and she had became a reader originally thanks to Harry Potter, so yay. And she also took my Harry Potter class. And so she in that class, we just discussed those books critically, and we discussed what they were doing and how the different plots were working and whatnot. And I didn't ever say, well, you know, this book is full of terrible messages for a young lady such as yourself. Like, we just discussed it in a basic way. But anyway, so when this student, she came back to work as an intern with me one summer when she was in college, and she told me honestly that she thought that those books, the Twilight books, affected how she looked at guys and relationships. She said that she probably stayed with one guy a little bit too long because she was kind of influenced by the fantasies of love depicted in the Twilight novels. But is there some sort of action I should have taken that would have helped her? And I taught that class for a couple of reasons. I wanted to uncover why I was sucked into those books, because I totally was. I was waiting for them to have sex. Anyway, and then I wanted the girls to think critically about what sucked them in and what all the longing and desire amounted to. What does that actually mean? We should dismiss romance as if it's just silly. No, there's so much going on under the waterline when it comes to romance. We did analyze Twilight, and I did bring in Gavin de Becker's The Gift of Fear, and we did look at the signs of a stalker and count how many Edward had, all of that. We did a close read of the birth scene of Renesmee and how it went on for 11 pages, and it was bloody and full of gore. And the sex scene, that's a paragraph this big and fades to black. So we wanted to just show them how vivid and graphic the birth gets to be, but the sex part, not so much. So maybe that class helped her, or maybe time and experience helped her. I don't really know, but I'm a little like the whole teaching being selfless and writing being selfish. I'm kind of uncomfortable saying that why I say it. I don't know what books are doing to people, and I don't want to recommend them necessarily like medicine, but sometimes they are like medicine. So anyway, let's think also about what used to be called problem novels, or sometimes they're called issue books. And these are books that deal with something that you might find a pamphlet for in the guidance counselor's office. And they'll be like eating disorders, depression, self-harm, addiction, relationship violence, living with a chronic or terminal illness, grief, homelessness, child abuse. Sometimes any of those topics being present in a book will cause that book to be called edgy as well. Which really drives me nuts, because think about your own self and the people immediately around you in your lives. We all know someone or are someone who has those problems. I don't know anyone. You can't swing a dead cat in my family without hitting someone with a mental illness, and I don't know about you, with mental illness or addiction especially. So calling that edgy seems crazy. It seems like the most normal thing in the world in a lot of ways. And we know how ubiquitous all of those problems are that I just mentioned, but yet we are going to say it's at the edge of our experience. It's kind of ridiculous. And that person who would experience, for example, homelessness or an eating disorder would be considered extraordinary. The subject of fiction, like The Boy Who Lived, is crazy. When these things happen to us, we know statistically it's so frequent. So when we consider the edge inside each reader, think about someone dealing with any of those problems. For example, think about a reader living with an eating disorder. Does seeing his or her struggle on the page seem dangerous or helpful? It's hard to say, because eating disorders are this sort of Hall of Mirror situation. We all know that with Lori Holtz Anderson's Winter Girls, that girls in their like Finspo websites will use quotes from Winter Girls as part of their regimen for weight loss, which I know infuriates Lori Holtz Anderson to no end. Books like Brandy Colbert's Point addresses eating disorders in a less head-on way. That character has a lot of other problems, and the eating disorder is just one part of her life. There's another book on eating disorders I really like called Trick of the Light by Lois Metzger, and it's about a boy with an eating disorder. And the cool thing about that book is that the narrator is the disease of anorexia, and it's telling the story about this boy from its point of view. So that's just a little highlight on that one problem. But then think about a book with a parent with a mental illness. This is something we see a lot as YA. Anything that has the stigma of mental illness, which it still has a stigma even though it's ubiquitous. Anything that way that could be happening in your family makes you feel alienated and disconnected and unvalued. And so if you read a book like Saving Francesca by Melina, is it Marchetta or Marchetta? Chetta? Some people tell me, and then I'm like, oh wait, I'll remember that, and then I never do. Which one? Chetta. Okay, thank you. Let's all say that together. Melina Marchetta. I love her books. Anyway, if you read Saving Francesca, it's about a girl with a depressed mom. And so maybe reading that will make you feel a little less alone. Might bring that reader back from their own edge. Similarly, Corianne Haydu's OCD love story does that really well with the anxiety disorder of obsessive-compulsive disorder, but it also does it in a very clever way. You're not really sure what this girl's deal is until you get to see the whole picture of how that disorder affects her life. But the other thing is, maybe readers that are well acquainted with these kinds of struggles, they don't want to be anywhere near these problems when they read. maybe they want to be as far away from them as possible as a source of comfort. So maybe the edge is some sort of, the quasi-medieval imaginings of George R. R. Martin, because they have nothing to do with their regular lives. Maybe they'll go to spy novels or horror fiction or historical romance novels, which is really my main way of escaping from life's tyranny. There's a project that was started by a librarian named Karen Jensen, who blogs for Teen Librarian Toolbox at School Library Journal. And it was a 2-year thing, and it's folded now, or it's just over. She's doing a different project. It's called Sexual Violence and Why Lit. And the goal was to further conversations about sexuality, consent, and sexual violence and abuse using books as the entry point. The beauty of this project is that discussing fictional characters and their experiences with sexual violence offers readers emotional cover about their own experiences. I've long maintained that if we cannot discuss sex in a rational, honest, and detailed way, is it any wonder that we lack understanding and skills for handling sexual violence or when sex goes terribly wrong? Using books to discuss what's at stake and who's responsible for what and what assumptions go into a situation of sexual violence or abuse is definitely trampling into edgy territory. But is it really so edgy to get people thinking about these issues? We're basically using sock puppets with these books to teach something that's extremely complicated, and it's very productive because it allows us to discuss our own values without outing our own sexual history. So if you are a victim of sexual abuse, but you don't feel comfortable bringing that to the fore, you can talk with these characters being a proxy. I think that's very valuable. We live in a world where Lori Holtz Anderson's Speak, which has won every award possible, was recently called pornographic. We live in a world where porn is apparently the equal of sexual violation. We live in a world that a girl struggling to find her own voice, to speak about what happened to her when she was raped, is labeled sexy. I could talk endlessly about the nuances of talking about sex with adolescents and about depicting their sex lives on the page. But again, I just want to say there's this paradox of why saving and why harming. I really believe in the discussions that the Sexual Violence and Young Adult Lit Project did. I think they help a culture that is stumbling and stammering along through very complicated subjects. When we're talking about rape or the rape of children or the sexual violation of young women, this project and these books give voice to topics that are unspeakable or edgy. In a book called Live Through This, author Mindy Scott details a girl's issues with sex with her boyfriend. She has been sexually abused since childhood by a family member, and the issue coming up with her boyfriend is that the physicality of orgasm, of feeling good, brings back memories of this abuse. She has only ever experienced orgasm at the hands of her abuser. Imagine for a moment being that girl. Imagine what it must be like to carry that guilt and shame. Imagine wanting to feel good with someone you love and being unable to stand it or explain it. Imagine seeing that exact same experience in a book and understanding everything from that aerial point of view, seeing the whole landscape of your life, seeing the context, seeing how you're not alone. Is reading this book edgy for that girl? Is it triggering her back into trauma? Could it help her? Could it make her worse? For those of us who are only imagining this scenario, is this fictional rendering disturbing and discomforting? Even hearing me say those words out loud in this relatively safe space, is that a sin or a taboo or a line being crossed? Is this a limit we should respect? I choose to see the existence of that book as a miracle. It's a miracle that experience got on the page. It's a miracle for someone who's experienced sexual abuse. It's a miracle for people who are lucky enough to not know what sexual abuse feels like, but who could possibly have empathy for those who do. And this is what makes me want to always go to the edge in my own writing and protect the edge of others, whatever that means, whatever it is for readers. I think when we quarrel with fictional reality, whether it's our own or others, the end result is loss. Someone loses, and it could be someone you don't mean to harm and don't even know. The edge, then, is a horizon that's constantly shifting, and what's even more perversely complicated, it's shifting constantly within each of us as readers. No wonder publishing is such a gamble and a crapshoot when it comes to what books want to take off. I don't envy publishers of that task of trying to profit off the vagaries of the human mind. Think about it. A reader who's been targeted for any given niche at any time could shift depending on what he or she has last read and been affected by. It could shift in an instant. My own kid devoured these books about fairies. They were like package books, like the dance fairies and the summer fairies, and you know what I'm talking about? Yes. And then like 2 seconds later, you know, she's got hair under her pits and won't read anything but manga. And I'm just like, what? Buy fairy books, you know? Anyway. Maybe you should